see incredible reports that outlaws may once again be planning a show of force.
Hey everyone. So 3.14 has been live for a little while now, and while it hasn't been perfect, I've had the chance to try out the new Ninetales lockdown event, and I wanted to take a look at that today. I'm also going to spend a bit of time going over Xenothreat, which has been in testing on the PTU for a while now, but it might show up in the live version pretty soon for the upcoming free fly. As always though, everything's timestamped, so feel free to skip around to whatever part you want to see, and if you enjoy this video, please consider leaving a like and or subscribing, or you can really help me out by becoming a channel member. I really appreciate all your support. So I just want to start out by going over what's going on right now. I'd say the biggest thing to be aware of is that there's going to be a free fly starting this Wednesday. These have gone a lot more smoothly recently than they did when they first started doing them, but just be ready to see a lot of questions in global chat starting on the 18th. There's probably going to be a lot of people confused on how to get to the hangars. Beyond that, it seems like we're still going to be getting frequent bug fixes for 3.14 because it still seems very unstable, with a lot of people noticing many more 30Ks than usual with this patch, and there's some really annoying bugs, like not being able to claim your ship and losing your Moby Glass, and I believe that second one happens every time you go to prison, which is very annoying. So these need to be addressed, and hopefully soon. But yeah, 3.14 definitely has not had the smoothest release, but that's somewhat understandable with the amount of content that was in this update. As for the events though, I'll get into how they're performing in a bit, but as for when they're happening, they seem to be running the Ninetales lockdowns pretty consistently on the weekends, and they've been playtesting Xenothreat on the PTU for the past couple of days, but I haven't heard anything yet about when that'll be taking place in the live version. So with the Ninetales lockdowns only happening on weekends, I do hope they run them for more than 2 weeks like we got with the first iteration of Xenothreat, because one of the biggest issues with that was the people that were playing for those 2 weeks when the event was going on generally got pretty bored with the mission by the end of that period, but there were also a lot of people who missed out on it completely because that still is a pretty short window of time. So yeah, hopefully with Ninetales more people will get to try it out, but it also won't be too annoying if they're only doing it on weekends, so you can have a more normal experience during the week. And yeah, apparently it's still manually triggered by CIG, which I was surprised to hear with how much they had discussed the work they were putting into dynamic mission triggers, but at least with it being on a somewhat static schedule for now, you should be able to try it out without too much hassle of trying to figure out when you can actually do the mission. Now I did still have a bit of trouble getting on at the right time this weekend when I was trying to catch it, since they didn't have it running constantly, so there were times when you would have to wait an hour or two for the next one to start up. And this was a little frustrating since I was getting on for the express purpose of trying out the mission, but I think it's still an improvement doing it this way versus how they had Xenothreat work. And as for Xenothreat this time around, again, I'm not sure how it's going to work in the persistent universe, but for the PTU builds where it's being tested, it seems like they have it going constantly for now. So if you just want to get on to do one of these missions, the PTU might be your best bet for now. Speaking of the missions themselves though, I'm going to start out with the Ninetales lockdown since it's new and I've got a good bit of stuff to go over. So if you aren't familiar with the Ninetales, they're a pirate group that resides in the Stanton system, and they generally seem to hang out around Crusader. For this new mission though, they'll decide to go out and blockade one of the smaller stations around Stanton and restrict quantum travel to and from that station. This can actually be a bit of a disruption because one of the stations that might get blockaded is CRU-L1, which is pretty popular for its refinery deck. But yeah, I think any of the CRU stations can be blockaded, but I'm not sure if it's just limited to those. So if you've seen other stations blockaded, let me know in the comments. I'd like to hear what you guys have seen. So for the blockaded station, you can still go there, but you get dropped out of quantum travel about 200 kilometers away from the station, so it's a bit of an inconvenience because that's an extra couple of minutes of travel time, and if you're trying to mine, that can either mean your quantanium is going to blow up on you before you get to the station, or you might have a rough time with the increased pirate AI spawns and generally more player activity in that area. So it's not a complete blockade of the station, as in you can't get there, but it definitely does inconvenience anyone in the area. Now with this event, I believe that there are 3 missions that it generates, so one of them is on the pirate side of things, and I'm not too sure on the details for this one because I don't have the criminal rep to be able to see these, but the Ninetales will hire you to disrupt Crusader Security's efforts to scan for and find the blockade. You'd do this by taking out the NPC terrapins that are doing the scanning, but I'm not entirely sure on the details, like if you have to take out all 3 of the terrapins and how much reward is offered for this. Whatever the reward is though, I don't think it's too significant because I tried out the mission a couple of times and only ever saw like 2 other players who were looking to go after those scanning ships. But yeah, if you guys have more info on that criminal side of the mission, I'd love to hear it in the comments. On the legal side of things though, you can either directly help the scanning team with a combat focused mission, or help out by hauling medical supplies to the blockaded station. So for the mercenary mission, I'd say this is probably the strongest aspect of this event. It is a little confusing to get this mission because it won't show up in your contract manager unless you actually fly to the blockaded area. That confused me for a little bit, but yeah, if you're looking to take part in the event, then you actually have to go to the station first before you can accept the mission. But once you accept it, you're instructed to follow Crusader Security's scanning ships to various scan points, and once they're there, you'll have to protect the 3 terrapins that they send out from a few waves of enemy Ninetails ships. In terms of the amount of resistance to expect, some of the waves will be pretty weak with only a few Cutlasses, Buccaneers, M50s, and maybe some Valkyries thrown in, but towards the end you'll sometimes see waves with a Hammerhead or 2. So this first scanning segment of the mission does go on for quite a while, probably like an hour and a half in total, but if you successfully protect the ships for all of the scans, the security forces will be able to locate the main blockade, and for the final part of the mission, you go and destroy the remaining Ninetails forces. So this final fleet battle is much bigger than the attacks on the scanning ships, and it includes an Idris on the Ninetails side. Now I'm not sure if it's intended, but in the instances where I got to this point, the Idris does seem to quantum travel away before being destroyed, or disappear, but I assume it's quantum traveling away. I'm not sure if that always happens, or if you can actually destroy it if you damage it quickly enough, but yeah, unfortunately I didn't get to see any beautiful Idris explosions during this mission. Let me know in the comments though what happened in your experience if you got to this point in the mission. But yeah, after you defeat the Ninetails fleet, the blockade is lifted and you can quantum travel to the station as you usually would. Overall, it's a pretty cool story, and I think it fits in well with the inverse lore, and there's a lot of good voice acting work that has gone into this with all the alert messages that notify you of the station being blockaded, and the various efforts to thwart the blockade, and then the notification of the blockade being lifted. Before we talk about the medical supply running mission, I want to talk about my opinions on the combat part of this mission. First of all, I think it takes a bit too long, especially if they want this to be a recurring event in the verse that happens dynamically whenever something triggers the Ninetails or whatever group in the future to decide to lock down a station. However, with the current length of the mission, I can't see players sticking around for the whole thing once the novelty of doing this the first couple of times wears off. Maybe they could address this by removing some of the downtime in the mission, but it takes over 2 hours and that's really a lot to commit to. So in my opinion, I think it should be a bit shorter, maybe something like an hour and a half at the most, because that's a much more manageable time frame, but it still gives people enough time to get the notifications about the lockdown, get prepared and fly over to where it's happening, and still have plenty of time to take part, especially because you start getting the notifications before the event even officially starts. And this length is especially annoying right now with how many 30Ks there have been. The most frustrating thing a 30k can do will always be stealing your cargo, but having sunk multiple hours into a mission just to not be able to finish it because of a server crash is pretty bad too. Also, even though you're there doing the mission for a while, a large amount of that time is either spent waiting for your enemies to spawn or flying in a straight line to the next scan location, which means just waiting while moving, because these locations are around 100 kilometers apart from each other. The amount of time you spend fighting the Ninetails for the scanning part of the mission is actually really limited, and even if you did have a constant stream of enemies, I still don't think that would be too enjoyable to be doing for 2 hours straight. Now again, some of this downtime issue I think is partially caused by the fact that the amount of enemies doesn't seem to scale with the amount of people that are there to help out with the mission. I could be wrong on this, but when I did the mission with a group of around 5 to 10 people, it seemed like there was about the right number of targets for all of us to have something to shoot at, but the times when more people were helping out, oftentimes the wave of enemies would spawn and you wouldn't even get a chance to fire your weapons at all if you weren't fast to react. I'm not sure if increasing the amount of resistance based on the number of players there would be a good direction to go in, because that sort of thing often feels lame and almost like you're being punished for being prepared as a player. But I think something that could help with the downtime issue and the issue of the lack of targets is maybe to have it so that the scanning ships only scan when there's no enemies in the area, but the actual scanning doesn't take much time at all. So once you clear out the enemies, the terrapins would do their scanning, and this would make it so that a larger group would defeat the waves more quickly and would get through the scanning process faster while still having something to do for the entire time they're there. Once you got past the scanning part and into the fleet battle, downtime wasn't really an issue anymore though, as long as the server wasn't dying, because I think with the intended behavior, the Ninetails will just keep on spawning in until you get to the final wave with the Idris and everything. So these sort of fleet battles that you can find in Xenothreat as well are all pretty fun, and it's always a cool challenge to take on an Idris, so I mostly enjoyed this part of the mission, except for the fact that the performance is still a big issue. Again, this is very server dependent, because with some of them it was bad but bearable, but on some servers my FPS was around 20, although when it got that low that usually indicated that a crash was coming. It's playable most of the time, but just barely, and I really hope that this testing in the persistent universe and Xenothreat testing in the PTU will let them find something to improve performance. Even just a little bit would help. But yeah, it gets pretty slideshowy, and even more annoying is the constant rubber banding. Besides that, my only other gripe with this mercenary aspect is the payout seemed kind of inconsistent and a little bit low. I think I only made around 150,000 credits or so for completing the whole mission, and that's including the bonuses from Call to Arms, so considering the amount of time the whole thing takes, that's not very much. You could probably make 4 times that much doing group bounties for the same period of time, and yeah, I know things are still getting balanced out and those payouts are probably a bit high, but it just seems to me that the reward for helping out in an emergency situation such as this should be a little bit higher. I've never had an issue with Xenothreat's payouts, so I think if they just modeled it a bit more closely to that, it would be perfect. And yeah, one of those things that I like about Xenothreat is that as you're making small bits of progress, you get incremental payouts. So even as you're just doing damage to the Idris, you get credit rewards for that. So even if there's a crash or you end up going to Klesher for crashing into someone, you at least still got some credits for your time. With Ninetales on the other hand, it only seems to pay out every time the terrapins finish scanning in one location, so you really are only getting payouts every 20 minutes or so, which is longer than most normal missions. Also, on the criminal side, the payouts must be really low because even though this was kind of hyped up as a PvP event, where you'd have players fighting for both sides and they'd actually designed a mission for criminals to take part in, it obviously didn't feel like a worthwhile risk for criminal players because, at least in my experience, I barely ran into any. Let me know if you guys' experience was different on this, but it didn't seem like there was much interest from criminals for this mission. I think the rewards for both sides will improve as they build out the reputation system a bit more, because a mission like this should really boost your reputation with whichever faction you decide to side with. But for now, if they want people to be motivated to do things, they're going to have to use credits. Overall though, I definitely enjoyed playing through this side of the mission, and with a bit of tweaking, and especially once we start getting some of those reputation-based rewards, I think this will be a great addition to the verse. And even if the gameplay side of it isn't perfect yet, I think events like this will really help to make the verse seem a bit more alive, especially once there's multiple versions of things like this and they all trigger themselves automatically with the whole Quanta system they've talked about. Right now it seems like players are fully in control of everything that happens in Star Citizen, but once we have a few variations on events like this, I think it's going to make the game feel very different. So while the combat side of the Ninetales lockdown event is pretty good in its current state, I'd say the supply running side leaves a lot to be desired. It feels like something that was just kind of tacked on, and the state that cargo running is in general right now doesn't help. So you can accept this mission from the delivery tab, and you don't even have to be in the area to accept it, and you get a brief about how it's dangerous to travel to the station right now and that they'll be very grateful for any medical supplies that you can get there. Now I do like this idea of commodities being requested through missions in the contract manager, and I'd like to see this implemented for trading under normal circumstances, but for this sort of event it doesn't really seem to fit to me. This is an emergency situation that's affecting the whole system, but they're still asking you to go through the normal retail medical supply distributors to get the supplies they want. That's like the military asking you to make a run to CVS for them. I think it would make a lot more sense for the story side of things if you could go to some depot to pick up the supplies for free, and this would help out a lot because for one, you'd be avoiding the ever-present risk of 30Ks, since if you do end up 30K'ing, you're not losing inventory that you paid for with your own credits, and two, they could have made a special location that actually has some medical supplies in stock, since for whatever reason they're very resistant to fixing inventory levels across the verse. So if they want to continue the current situation where there's basically no availability for any commodities, they could have at least had a special way to make this mission still doable. But yeah, even though this mission is available in the contract manager, I'd say you can't really do it. I visited every location where you can buy medical supplies, including the new trade area in Orizon, the Hicks Research Outpost on Selen, Deacon's Research Outpost on Yellow, Port Olazar, Rayari Anvik on Calliope, and Rayari McGrath on Clio. And I think the most that I was ever able to buy was somewhere around 2,000 credits worth. Even after hanging around Port Olazar for a couple of days and buying every once in a while between bounty missions, this was all that I was able to load up. I know it's a Starlifter, so even a decent amount of supplies would look pretty small in here, but this is under 10,000 credits worth. And yeah, you do get a bonus on top of the usual sale price when you get it to the station, but when you're dealing with quantities this low, you'd still be better off doing even the terrible box delivery missions. I'm really disappointed by this part of the Ninetales event, because it feels almost disrespectful at this point, the way that CIG has been dealing with trade, or not dealing with it for the past year almost. They included this new mission type that people have been asking for and could be a whole lot of fun, but then they don't even let you do it because there's no supply available. Now there's a lot of things that people have been saying to defend CIG on the current trade situation, like they made hauling less profitable so that people would focus on testing other things, or that it would be a waste of resources to spend time on it now because it's going to be reworked with Quana later. And these were somewhat valid points, although for the testing focused part, I think trying to force players to do gameplay loops that they don't like is just gonna send them to a different game. But creating a mission like this focused around commodity hauling kind of invalidates both of these points. If it's new content, they both spent time making it, and they're gonna need people to test it, so I really don't understand why they couldn't have at least temporarily increased the medical supplies available. I'm going to leave it there, but it's a shame that you can't actually do this mission, because I think it would have been a lot of fun, and it could have created some interesting interactions between haulers and pirates, so I really do hope they hotfix the commodity amounts. Alright, now for the other big mission, Xenothreat is coming back, and like I mentioned in my last video, not too much has changed since the last time. It's definitely improved from last week though in terms of stability and performance, and I think I actually had more 30Ks doing the Ninetales lockdown on the live servers than trying out Xenothreat on the PTU. So yeah, it's the same sort of go clear the pirates out of the wreck sites and retrieve the cargo as last time, with the big fleet battles in waves and at the end of the mission, but there are some nice quality of life improvements. They've added more useful information to the dialogue that you get during the event, like being told to go land at the nearest rest stop instead of going to the Jericho station itself, which was confusing to some people.
Check in with medical down on the rest stop. Want to have your information sorted if the worst happens and we need to revive you.
And there's also some messages when you pick up each of the volatile cargo types explaining how to handle them correctly.
Not sure if you transported Zeta Prolinite before, but make sure you deliver it to Jericho quick. If that timer on the box runs out, the mineral's useless.
Also, it seems a lot harder to accidentally get a crime stat now with some of the changes that they've made to friendly fire. I've heard that using distortions makes it easy to accidentally do more damage than the threshold allows, so be aware of that if you're running those. But other than that, it seems like the only way to accidentally get a crime stat now is to run into someone. It was incredibly annoying last time because with all the security personnel flying around and the zero tolerance for friendly fire, it was super easy to get a crime stat and immediately be booted from the mission, but that should be pretty infrequent now, unless you're really unlucky with your flying. Again, I think the performance issues are still the biggest drawback for this mission as well, but I still had a lot of fun playing it. I did end up trying out the Nomad, and other than the precariously stacked boxes moving around a concerning amount while I was flying back, it worked quite well. It really is like a space pickup truck, and it's just as convenient to throw stuff in the back. I also did try out using the 600i for some of the fleet battles, and while it does bring a ton of firepower, it also has a big target for that Idris railgun, so if you end up bringing something this large to the fight, you'd better watch out if that Idris starts pointing towards you and get out of the way. Even though you're not supposed to let it happen, it's kinda cool to see the Idris using its railgun on the Javelin, but I don't think it would be all that cool to have it used on you. And the structure of the mission too, with the unpredictable attacks, can create some really cool moments, like here when I was dropping off supplies and got the alert that Xenothreat were launching another attack right as I was leaving to get back in my ship. And as I was walking to my ship, on the landing pad I had the amazing view of the docked Javelin to my left, but I could also look up and see the incoming enemy Idris. So yeah, I think Xenothreat is still some of the most fun I've had in Star Citizen, and definitely the most fun in terms of a structured mission. There's still a lot of work to do on the performance side, but remember they haven't dropped the player count down this time, and we've got a whole new landing zone with Orizon that the servers have to deal with now. I do wish they would do something like lower the player counts temporarily to give us a bit of a performance boost, but at least in terms of general glitchiness, the mission does seem to be improved, and it's a bit more robust feeling now. Alright, so that's all I have for now. I really do want to hear from you guys on this one though. The experiences people have during these events can vary a lot from person to person, and I'm interested in hearing how these events have gone for you all if you've had the chance to try them out. Alright, so now I want to thank my members GreatWatch93 and StarJump Starlet. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel, and if you guys want to help me out, you can do that by hitting the like or subscribe button, or if you really want to support me, you can do that with the join button. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.